Assalamu alaikum and welcome to season 7 of Bookbytes. We've just come through a refreshing and illuminating month of the Ramadan shows, and I look forward to a whole stream of beautiful new writing. There's been such an engaging lot of new books coming out. And just recently, and just before I introduced our guest for today, I finally got to read a fascinating new novel that was entertaining, reflective, and a whole load of fun. But it was really like allowing me a window into this world. Today's book is called Stirring the Pot, the debut novel by Dr. Quraisha Dawood. And it's really based in Durban in a block of flats. It could be any block of flats called Summer Terrace. And it centers around the women in Summer Terrace specifically. And this idea that, life is kind of incidental around the major features and the relationships formed by women with women, whether these women are their neighbors, their in laws, the domestic helpers that work with them. There's a strong sense of sisterhood, and I really enjoyed that about stirring the pot. So, Quraisha Dawood is a South African sociologist and writer. In 2002, she published an anthology of poems entitled Jewels of Faith. She has since been published in various publications and magazines, as well as academic journals. In 2020, she published a memoir called Almost Me, her journey through miscarriage, postpartum depression, and motherhood, a very, very relevant topic. She holds a PhD in sociology from the University of KwaZulu-Natal and is currently research manager of a private higher education institution. Stirring the Pot is her first fictional novel. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show, Quraisha. It's so lovely to finally be able to chat to you about this riveting, entertaining read.
Walaikum salam, Shafinaaz. Thank you so much for having me.
So, stirring the pot to get right into it, not just from the mouth-watering recipes that dot their way through this. I want to try some of these recipes. There's mutton kalia in there that I enjoyed. There's some desserts that I enjoyed looking at. Tell us about the titles to get right into writing this novel.
So the novel was actually, the main idea behind my master's thesis, and I really, as a sociologist yourself, that we're so interested in the interactions between people, especially those in the gray areas of society. And so I looked into the relationships between Muslim employers and their domestic workers. And one of the main findings was that the domestic workers who had embraced Islam in their dressing or their speaking or their cooking skills were the ones who literally were allowed to stir the pot. So, you know, they were allowed into the kitchen and set the tables for Ramadan and iftar and things like that. So I remember, just having this idea that stirring the pot was a literal and metaphorical way of putting this idea across in the thesis when I first started.
So, Stirring the Pot was the title of the original thesis.
No, it was questioning the intimacy between Muslim madams and their maids. But when I've got that balance between academic writing and creative writing. So I always said, one day when I write this or a story or a little article, it would be called Stirring the Pot.
And invariably, narratives find their way into the story in your head. There's a third dimension that's already forming when you're interviewing someone, when you're engaging that story and those narratives, and when you're on the field collecting these. So it's so beautiful that this has developed into this multi-dimensional saga. It's got all the elements of a perfect saga, the gossip, the stigma, the stereotypes. But the strength of sisterhood is something that comes through as a theme when I read. And it's so beautiful to see because women share their stories through food and commiserate with each other and celebrate with each other. Tell us about the women that make up Summer Terrace, the occupants of Summer Terrace.
Well, they aren't all, just drawn from the thesis. I've had to add my bits of imagination because I really wanted a depth of characters. So we've got Auntie Ruki, who's like an older, traditional Muslim woman, and her helper Joyce has been with her, or it has been inherited by her, and been with her for about 36 years. And then we've got Shireen, who is one of my favorite characters that just came to me, and she's totally completely fictional, and she's more you know uh, on the fence between modernism and what is expected of a Muslim woman. And she's also looks down her nose at certain people in the building. We've got Rabia, who is a single mom, and she works full time, and her domestic worker is Precious. And then Zaina, who is someone that brings the whole story together, who's a younger person, and she's got her own ideas, and her relationship as a younger person with her domestic worker is something that I relate to a lot. And so I feel like a lot of people can relate to different madams or maids at different points in their lives.
I have to agree with you. I mean, as much as we say there's, fact from your fact finding or your data collection and the fiction of adding those dimensions when you're writing in fictional story, there's these identifiable aspects of each woman in one of us, one might say, and so that's what makes it so relatable. The story is so made so relatable. We all know somebody kind of like Shireen or kind of like Ravi, or grappling with the issues that Zaina has to grapple with. I also enjoyed that pivotal to the story is this mother-daughter relationship between Zaina and Rabia and Zaina, who are navigating as this single mom raising a daughter. I found that a very beautiful aspect, a challenging and beautifully written aspect of the story. Speak to us about this mother-daughter relationship that they have.
So, you know, growing up as an only child and a daughter of a very strong, independent woman, my mom has been a real inspiration to me in that way. And you know, it's been difficult to navigate the Muslim community in that way. And so I wanted to bring it across in a way that wasn't sort of like, oh, let me tell you about my story and how I feel in society and things like that. No. But yes, they love each other a lot. But there are also points of contention because as a single mom, Rabia in the story has to show a brave face and has to protect herself and her daughter from people who are maybe just waiting for her to, make a mistake. And her daughter feels the pressure, but also loves her mom a lot. And so while there are points of contention, there are real points of love and tenderness and looking after each other in that way. From their sleeping arrangements to keeping the door a bit open so that they can check on each other, to the way they communicate and the way they cook for each other when the other needs nourishment, both for their soul and also the food is something that really brings them together in that way.
I also saw the food dotted as this kind of, chained links between the mother and daughter, but also the rest of the women in the building. Whether they're sharing platters or whether it's pivotal to each of the events. There's wedding food and there's funeral food and there's um, pre-Ramadan prep food and all of that. And I enjoyed how that kind of literally the smells and the taste waft through your story so beautifully. But there's also, I mean, with Zaina, to interrogate Zaina and Rabia and Zaina, um, very subtly, but it's there. This Rabia being aware of the stigma of being a divorcee, even though you don't sort of put a billboard out there, and in a way that may, it may inform her behavior or expectations of how her daughter conducts herself. And I think her daughter might realize that, and so also has to keep the unsuitable boy a bit of a secret.
Yes.
So
And
this unsuitable boy, speak to us about that relation.
that was difficult for me because, you know, it is something that does happen, but also to write about in the context of Islam was difficult, and I did wonder, am I doing the right thing, or what? But I drew on life on campus, and it's a huge part of Zaina's life. And so ultimately, she is tested in that way where, she might like the idea of someone, but and they might have all these traits of a suitable boy, but essentially, I think that she learns that there are certain things she will not settle for, um, even at a pivotal point in the book where she's at a fork in the road. And I think that Islam plays a huge role in the way she conducts herself in that way, and that inner turmoil that she has, um, and her conversations with Allah when she's on the musalla, and that relationship with Allah is really something that I could identify with as well.
I really think that's a, it's a brilliant reflection, because also those kinds of contradictions that come up in exploring relationships or exploring whatever opportunities await, and then reflecting on that as a Muslim woman, as a growing Muslim woman, and what that means to us. So it comes through very beautifully. This friendship between mother and daughter, and then these contradictions at play, because she knows if she's not able to share, that there's something wrong
Yeah.
instinctively with the situation. So that comes through very well as well. And the stigmas, the racial stereotypes, because there's some cases where the women can confide in their domestic helpers in a way that they can't confide in pretty much anyone else. They know, or they feel they won't be judged. But there are those contradictions in those relationships. It comes through in whether they can share a meal together or not. Since this is a very big part of your research, tell us around the grounding of that data, and how that falls into play in your story.
So, the main theoretical framework behind the research was the power imbalance between the domestic worker and the madam, because it's such a unique relationship, because it's quite invisible, and it takes place behind closed doors. And growing up, I was always had this weird relationship with my domestic worker. I just felt so terrible that somebody's being employed to, pick up after me. And, I just dove into this awkwardness because I wanted to find out more about it, and the aspect of Islam that permeates this relationship, especially because we as Muslim women have such particular um, requirements when it comes to pak and napak in the Muslim home. And so from the data, it was found that um, the first part of it was, well, what do Muslim women look for in the ideal domestic worker? And it was someone who was trustworthy, who knew the Pak from Napak, perhaps had worked for a Muslim woman before, but also, dressed modestly and answered the phone with Assalamu alaikum and understood haram and halal. And I think um, going on from that, it was okay. A lot of them actually bonded over things like being mothers. So perhaps if the lady I was interviewing was having a difficult time with her child, she might not, vent to her husband, but she'll tell her domestic worker who will sympathize with her and say, "Oh, I've had the same issues." or you have someone like Ruki and Joyce, where Joyce has been with Ruki for so long that she's almost like her mother-in-law. She shouts her and she's like, stop making the place dirty, things like that. And there is quite a bond. Sometimes it's just a look between the helper and the employer that passes, that they don't even need to communicate. So there's also, private and public spaces within the private space of the home. And that was something that came out in the thesis quite loudly, where some domestic workers knew that they cannot touch the Quran or maybe walk across the musalla, while others had to be taught that. So, in some instances, Shireen is reading Salah, and then her domestic worker will know, okay, I can't like open the room and just walk through, or they'll answer the phone and say, well, madam is praying right now. But I think that sociologically, it comes across as domestic workers may be passive and helpless, and when it comes to utensils that they eat from or where they eat. But actually, when I did interview the domestic workers, they said, no, I actually like to sit on the floor in the balcony, or go away and take my food and eat it somewhere else, because I get to choose where I eat, and I don't really want to sit at the table and chat with my madam. So or I like to do it this way, or I've taught my madam how to do it this way. So it came across that no, there is agency among domestic workers, even though it might not seem like it from the outside.
So there was definitely this sense of undeniable friendship relationships between each of the women and the women and their domestic helpers, perhaps because of their reliance on each other, or in spite of it. And a general sense of class distinction. Because I mean, for example, when subtly when you talk about Auntie Julie passing the jewelry around to show everyone, and everyone sort of getting very excited because we graded by what we display in our material possessions, and so the in-laws must be really okay if they can if they can share this kind of jewelry or whatever. And so from that across to how domestic helpers are treated, or the expectation around how they should be, how they shouldn't be. There were these for me these kind of pull outs, mannerisms, women understanding how they should behave in front of their in-laws, in front of their husbands, daughters in front of their mothers, and subsequently the maids in front of their employers. All of these mannerisms stood out for me as symbols. Like we're very symbolic in how we survive. We have a survival instinct. How we present ourselves came through. I mean, this is an entertaining read, and I'm salivating at the sociological aspects as well. So I'm going to just sort of pick your brain on it a bit more. And not take away from the fact that it's an incredibly entertaining read as well, a fascinating and fun read as well. Talk to me about mannerisms, if you don't mind, just getting into
Yeah.
how people have to behave to survive in their context.
Well, I know it was like I had to make that distinction between how the domestic workers were chatted and laughed with each other in their quarters, and how they presented themselves with their employers, and I had to make that distinction quite clear, because you have to act a certain way, or be respectful around your employer's husband, for example. um, and kids as well have to really portray their goodness, if I can say, with their parents, which is what Zaina had to really overcome, I think. But it was also, the simple act of when, Zaina goes to take Halim to Ruki, and she sees Ruki's hair and it's soft around her shoulders. And Ruki opens the door, and you're like, who is that, And I think we can all identify with that as South Africans. Um, to assert our boundaries, and what happens inside the home and what happens outside. And so, yeah, the mannerisms of, or even Violet, when she's leaving home and she's all dressed up, and Zaina realizes that I don't know the true Violet. I know Violet, the domestic worker, but I have no idea about the rest of her life. And Shireen's way of saying, "Oh, I don't eat fried food," or "I don't socialize with this," or the way she fights her aging. So I think those things are they. I had to have them as markers in the story, because when you write a thesis and it's very academic, and then you write an article and that is so scientific, and it has those parameters, and I just felt like I'm not getting across all these little intricacies that happen. And so I just couldn't leave it on a dusty shelf and just let it collect dust on an academic library shelf. um, I had to flesh it out in the book. And so these mannerisms in the food and the different tastes, um, all had to come through to give depth to these characters.
Well, you've done so very successfully and very enjoyably as well, because your characters are believable. They have a life of their own, and they have a good sort of they flow with color and with this kind of flavor through the book. There's also, some of the sort of stereotypical comments or whatever that come through. This idea that cooking skill is still a top priority. The way to a man's heart is through his stomach, so to speak, and being able to be a really good cook if one was to be marriageable. Auntie Julie also, sort of brags about how she's trained her daughter to be able to cook. And food is a very strong thread throughout the book, subtly and more distinctly as well. Speak to us about some of these gendered stereotypes that come through, especially around being domesticated.
Well, for this interaction of madams and maids, to be spoken about across races, and you'll know that there have been books about it. There has to be a gender dynamic in the relationship between domestic worker and employer, that had to come through in the book. But I had to take it a little deeper, because of the gendered stereotypes that exist in our society. So even though Shireen hates to cook, she'll do it because it's her job. Um, you know, um, Ruki is amazed that Zaina can cook, and then the next thing she says is, "Oh well, she needs to get married now." And and it's just something about us as food and cooking being an integral part of the Muslim identity, along with language and the caste that you come from, and it's seen as a real asset that you have to do that. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that the personality is conveyed through the recipes, though. So, like Shireen's recipe is really simple and really easy, because she won't have much to do with cooking a really like elaborate thing. But yeah, it just had like Ruki as well. She looks at sewing and cooking and being polite as something that is associated with being a successful woman. So success for these women is based on different things, but cooking seems to be the thread that flows through everything in the book.
I agree. I think it adds the warmth and a whole dimension of flagrant flavors. But we associate so much with the memory of food, the foods that we've eaten, in our childhood and as we've grown up, the foods we associate with certain festivals like Eid, a wedding, a funeral, and that sort of thing. Ramadan as well. I mean, we've got, a range of flavors that follow from our halim and say endless savories and that sort of thing. So I want to congratulate you. We have run out of time, but it was a beautiful book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I highly recommend it. And I think that the book, it will speak for itself in many ways. But I want to congratulate you on this beautiful compilation, this beautiful publication. I'm sure we look forward to many more from you in the future. And I really, really enjoyed having this opportunity to chat to you. What quick advice would you have for writers who have been doubting themselves and putting their stories out there?
I think we need to get comfortable with criticism and show your work to people that you trust and who can give you that constructive feedback. And apply and like make sure you're going to get criticism from your publisher as well. And yes, that did hit me a bit hard at the beginning when Penguin was like, there are a list of things you need to change. And you have to realize, yes, that they want the best for the book. And you work through it and rewrite again. And eventually, when you get the yes and you sign that contract, it's such an amazing feeling for yourself. So I encourage people to be open with their writing and not just be too afraid to share it.
That's wonderful advice. Congratulations once again. We've got some comments coming up on Facebook. A reader said they thoroughly enjoyed the book. Another reader said they thoroughly enjoyed the social dynamics that you've captured. Well done. Multiple congratulations. And with that, we end today's edition. The show will still be viewable on YouTube afterwards. And once again, Jazakallah khair for giving us your time today.
Jazakallah so much, Shafinaaz.
And so there you have it, our first edition of Bookbytes Season 7. And we spoke to Quraisha Dawood about her debut novel, Stirring the Pot. See you soon on the next edition, so we can have a look at another book with us on Bookbytes. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.